Have you ever heard of a war that lasted for 30 years, pitted cousin against cousin, and tore a kingdom apart, all because of a simple flower? Well, not asterisk, just asterisk a flower, but the symbols were a red rose and a white rose. This is the incredible, dramatic, and often brutal story of the Wars of the Roses, a fight for the English throne that shaped the nation forever. So, how did it all begin? To understand this epic conflict, we need to rewind to the reign of King Edward III. He had many sons, and this large, powerful family is key. Two of his most important sons were the third, John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, and the fourth, Edmund of Langley, Duke of York. Fast forward a few generations, and their descendants, the House of Lancaster and the House of York, both believed they had the strongest claim to the throne of England. For a while, the Lancastrians were in power, but their king, Henry VI, was, let's say, not the most effective ruler. He was known for his gentle and pious nature, but he suffered from severe bouts of mental illness, sometimes becoming completely unresponsive for months on end. This created a massive power vacuum. England was in a mess. The country had just lost the 100 Years' War with France, the economy was in shambles, and the nobles were getting restless. The most powerful of these nobles was Richard, Duke of York. He was capable, ambitious, and had a legitimate claim to the throne through both his mother and father. Seeing Henry VI's weakness, Richard of York started to assert his influence. He argued that he should be the one to rule, at least as Lord Protector, while the king was unwell. But King Henry's wife, the formidable and fiercely protective Margaret of Anjou, was having none of it. She saw York as a direct threat to her husband and, more importantly, to her young son, Prince Edward. The tension was unbearable. It was like a giant powder keg, and in 1455, it finally exploded. The first major clash happened at the First Battle of St. Albans. The Yorkists, led by Richard of York and his ally, the Earl of Warwick, who we lines later know as the Kingmaker, marched on the King's position. The battle was small by medieval standards, but its impact was huge. The Yorkists won, capturing King Henry VI and killing several of their key Lancastrian rivals. Richard of York was named Lord Protector of England. The Wars of the Roses had officially begun, but this was far from the end. It was just the opening act. For the next few years, an uneasy truce held, but it was a peace built on sand. Queen Margaret was regrouping, gathering supporters in the north, determined to win back control. In 1459, fighting erupted again. This phase of the war saw fortunes swing wildly. At the Battle of Northampton, the Yorkists once again captured King Henry VI, thanks in part to some treachery in the Lancastrian ranks. After this victory, Richard of York made his boldest move yet. He marched into Parliament and placed his hand on the empty throne, declaring himself king. The Lords were shocked. They weren't quite ready for that. Instead, they brokered a compromise, the Act of Accord. Henry VI would remain king for his lifetime, but Richard of York and his heirs would succeed him, disinheriting Henry's own son. Queen Margaret was absolutely furious. Disinherit her son? Never. She raised a massive army and met Richard of York at the Battle of Wakefield in the winter of 1460. This time, the Lancastrians were victorious. In a brutal turn of events, Richard, Duke of York, was killed in the battle. His head, along with those of his son Edmund and another key ally, was stuck on the gates of the city of York, mockingly adorned with a paper crown. It was a devastating blow for the House of York. It seemed like their cause was lost. But Richard had another son, a tall, charismatic, and brilliant military commander named Edward. And this is where the story takes another dramatic turn. Instead of crumbling, the Yorkist cause rallied behind the 18-year-old Edward. He was everything Henry VI was not: decisive, handsome, and a natural-born warrior. He quickly proved his mettle, securing a victory at Mortimer's Cross. Meanwhile, Queen Margaret's army, fresh from its victory at Wakefield, marched south, winning another battle at St. Albans and freeing King Henry VI. But her army had a reputation for looting, which made the citizens of London terrified. They refused to open their gates to her. Seizing the moment, Edward and the Earl of Warwick raced to London, where they were welcomed as heroes. In a bold political move, Edward was proclaimed King Edward IV in March 1461. But to be king, you have to secure your throne. And that meant one final, decisive battle. On a snowy Palm Sunday in 1461, the two largest armies ever assembled on English soil met at the Battle of Towton. It was a horrific, bloody, and merciless fight that lasted for hours in a blizzard. The casualties were staggering, with some estimates suggesting over 28,000 men died that day. But in the end, Edward IV's leadership and a timely reinforcement sealed a crushing victory for the Yorkists. The Lancastrian army was shattered. Queen Margaret and her son fled to Scotland, and Henry VI became a fugitive. Edward IV, the first Yorkist king, was now firmly in control. For nearly a decade, Edward IV ruled over a relatively peaceful England. He was a popular king, restoring law and order and stabilizing the economy. But trouble was brewing, and it came from an unexpected place: his own side. The kingmaker, the Earl of Warwick, who had been instrumental in putting Edward on the throne, grew increasingly frustrated. He felt that the king was ignoring his advice and favoring the family of his new queen, Elizabeth Woodville. Edward had secretly married her for love, a move that enraged Warwick, who had been trying to arrange a powerful political marriage for the king with a French princess. Feeling sidelined, Warwick did the unthinkable. He switched sides. He made an alliance with his old enemy, Margaret of Anjou, promising to restore her husband, Henry VI, to the throne. In 1470, Warwick launched a surprise invasion. Edward IV, caught off guard, was forced to flee the country, and the frail Henry VI was taken from his prison in the Tower of London and placed back on the throne. It was a stunning reversal, but Edward IV wasn't done yet. With help from his brother-in-law, the Duke of Burgundy, he gathered an army and returned to England in 1471. What followed was a lightning campaign. Edward outmaneuvered and defeated Warwick at the Battle of Barnet, where the kingmaker himself was killed. Just a few weeks later, he faced Margaret of Anjou and her son, Prince Edward, at the Battle of Tewkesbury. It was another decisive Yorkist victory. The Lancastrian Prince Edward was killed in the battle's aftermath, the first and only Prince of Wales to die in combat. His death extinguished the main Lancastrian line. A few days later, King Henry VI died in the Tower of London, most likely murdered on Edward IV's orders. With all his rivals dead, Edward IV's throne was finally secure. Edward IV ruled for another 12 years, a period of peace and prosperity. But when he died suddenly in 1483, the kingdom was once again thrown into chaos. His son, the new King Edward V, was only 12 years old. Edward IV had named his trusted brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, as Lord Protector to rule until the young king came of age. But what happened next is one of the most enduring mysteries in English history. Richard brought the young king and his younger brother to the Tower of London, supposedly for their protection. Then he declared that Edward IV's marriage had been invalid and that his children were illegitimate. With the princes out of the way, Richard took the throne for himself, becoming King Richard III. The two young princes were never seen again. Richard III's reign was short and troubled. Many people believed he had murdered his own nephews, and his support began to crumble. Across the Channel in France, there was one last Lancastrian hope. A man named Henry Tudor. His claim to the throne was weak, but with Richard's unpopularity growing, he saw his chance. In 1485, Henry Tudor landed in Wales with a small army. He marched through the country, gathering support as he went. On August 22, 1485, at Bosworth Field, the final battle of the Wars of the Roses took place. During the battle, several of Richard III's key allies either switched sides or refused to fight. In a desperate final charge, Richard III was unhorsed and killed, the last English king to die in battle. Henry Tudor was crowned King Henry VII on the battlefield. To finally unite the warring houses, he made a brilliant political move. He married Elizabeth of York, Edward IV's eldest daughter. This marriage symbolically merged the White Rose of York and the Red Rose of Lancaster, creating a new symbol for a new era, the Tudor Rose. This act brought the brutal 30-year conflict to an end and established the famous Tudor dynasty. The Wars of the Roses were over, but their legacy of ambition, betrayal, and the brutal fight for power continues to fascinate us to this day. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through one of the most chaotic periods in English history. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the past. Let me know in the comments which historical event you'd like to see covered next. Until then, stay curious.